Hello and welcome to PFF Wire. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing today?
Doing well. I think we saw a battle of the potential top teams in the NFC last night, and I know it's been some slow starts to the season, but Broncos Chargers, at least before the season, was probably pegged as an exciting Monday night game before we saw how these teams would play out early in the year.
Absolutely. Some decent primetime matchups here last night and into today. Today on PFF Wire, we'll be talking about a trade, everything fresh off the wire. We'll be giving you one up, one down from the weekend's slate of games. We'll be talking about that Monday Night Football matchup between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos. But let's start off with the biggest news of the day. We've got a trade. The Carolina Panthers traded wide receiver Robbie Anderson to the Arizona Cardinals, of all teams, for a 2024 sixth round pick, a 2025 seventh round pick. I think that it was certainly possible that Robbie Anderson was going to get traded even before this weekend's games, but after he got kicked off the sideline by interim head coach Steve Wilks for getting into some sort of altercation with other assistant coaches, this seemed inevitable. I'm somewhat surprised by who actually acquired Robbie Anderson in a trade, but it does make sense given Marquise Brown's injury. We'll get into that in a second here. But Brad, initial reaction to Robbie Anderson getting traded?
Fortunately, I think you touched on it right at the end there. We saw Marquise Brown leave his press conference or locker room availability with a boot on his foot after the game against the Seattle Seahawks, a game in which the Cardinals did not score a touchdown on offense. They had 3 offensive points against the team that was dead or second to last in EPA per play allowed before that game, which says a lot, I believe. So when you see Robbie Anderson get traded for about a minimum salary this year, $690,000, next year owed about $12.75 million, but the odds he sees that are probably close to zero. Unfortunately, it probably suggested Marquise Brown, who had come on in recent weeks, was playing some really good football, was garnering a ton of targets from Kyler Murray, now potentially out for the season in a pseudo contract year going into his 5th-year option. So kind of unfortunate. It's probably still a net negative for the team, but they do get DeAndre Hopkins back this week.
Yeah, DeAndre Hopkins back from a suspension. As you mentioned, likely a season-ending injury for Marquise Brown. That's what I believe ESPN's Adam Schefter reported. But I mean, yeah, it's decent to be able to get a player like Robbie Anderson back, given that injury. The Cardinals do have a ton of other wide receiver options, even before you get into Robbie Anderson. I feel like they probably could have weathered this storm without Marquise Brown, given the fact that they've got Rondale Moore, they've got AJ Green, they've got Greg Dortch, they've even got a bunch of guys on their practice squad right now who could probably, be somewhat helpful for them. But yeah, Robbie Anderson really isn't costing them that much in salary, certainly not a whole lot in draft capital compensation. So it was a deal that certainly made sense for them if they are losing Marquise Brown for the rest of the season. And it made sense for the Panthers to recoup some draft capital. I'm sure they would have probably preferred that those draft picks be in 2023 rather than in 2024 or 2025. But this is also likely a long rebuild for the Carolina Panthers. So any draft picks they can get back for a player who, after Sunday, looked like he might have been on his way out with a cut rather than a trade is probably a net positive for them. But Brad, as far as the Carolina Panthers go, there were certainly some reports over the weekend about other players who could be traded on their way out of Carolina. The big name Christian McCaffrey, I think it was Jake Glazer of Fox, who reported that they would want multiple first-round picks. Can't really see that happening, even though Christian McCaffrey, one of the best offensive playmakers in the NFL, when he's healthy. There were other reports that the Panthers would be less willing to trade players like Brian Burns and Derek Brown, though there was a report, I believe, from Jeremy Fowler, who said that they would have to get blown out of the water to be willing to trade one of those players. That does tell me that it's at least still somewhat of a possibility. But as far as reasonable trades go that the Carolina Panthers could still ship out, who are some potential names?
Yeah, so like you said, I agree. If the Panthers actually think they're getting 2 first-round picks for Christian McCaffrey, then they just don't want to trade him, and that's essentially what that is saying. I did write up an article for today, though, looking at a potential more realistic trade for Christian McCaffrey. Kind of funny how many connections he has around the NFL. I sent him to the Buffalo Bills for a 2nd and a 5th, and Bills GM Brandon Beane was the assistant GM in Carolina for about 10 days after drafting Christian McCaffrey and then going to become the GM for the Bills. He also, of course, knows Kyle Shanahan since he was a kid. Shanahan actually used to babysit for him about 20 years ago. So a bunch of funny connections around the NFL. But yeah, the more realistic guys, Robbie Anderson was always the most obvious candidate. I think he kind of sped that process along with his antics on Sunday. I also think tackle Cam Irving is a very interesting name to monitor. Started about 600 snaps for them last year, signed a 2-year, $10 million deal, but they obviously drafted Ike Ekwonu in the top 10 this year, have Taylor Moton on the right side, and teams across the NFL need tackles. You can add to that list now. The Los Angeles Rams lost Joseph Noteboom to a torn Achilles on Sunday. They already had maybe the most banged up offensive line in the entire league. So he's one. I think center Bradley Bozeman is another. And I think cornerback CJ Henderson, who they traded a 3rd-round pick for last year, he's 3rd in the pecking order behind J.C. Horn, behind Dante Jackson, has been playing a decent amount this year. But I think you recoup whatever you can get there. He has a fully guaranteed contract still left, about $4.8 million, I want to say, total over the next year and a half. But also has his 5th-year option decision after this 2022 season. So hypothetically, if a team wanted to acquire him and maybe pick that up, probably not the most likely scenario, but you'd want to give the team time to make that determination. So I think those are some names to keep an eye on going forward, not necessarily Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and I mean, if that asking price comes down, then maybe they'd be willing to move on from Christian McCaffrey. But it's tough when you put it out there ahead of time, like, yeah, we want 2 first-round picks for Christian McCaffrey. If they wind up getting, as you mentioned, a 2nd and a 5th, fans might be wondering, like, why the hell are we trading this guy if we thought that we could get 2 first-round picks for him? Some late-breaking news here in the show. Ian Rapport of NFL Media just tweeted that following the MRI, Marquise Brown foot injury is not as bad as initially thought. It's a small non-surgical fracture. Recovery time is about 6 weeks. He's getting a second opinion before moving forward. But that's good news. And now the Cardinals just have basically all the wide receiver depth in the league, or as humanly possible. But unfortunately, these guys keep missing time 6 weeks at a time, because that's how long DeAndre Hopkins' suspension was. That's now the timeline potentially for Marquise Brown. So still valuable to get a guy like Robbie Anderson in the building, especially for what they gave up for him, but maybe not quite as necessary as they originally thought it would have been. I do have one question for you on the Robbie Anderson trade, cap-wise. So Robbie Anderson comes to the Arizona Cardinals with $690,000 in salary, very, very small. How much cap gets subtracted from what the Panthers have right now, and how much of that dead cap moves forward for them?
So they saved, that remaining $690,000, and then because this is a post-June 1 trade, basically any transaction that occurs after that is treated that way. So the dead cap will be split over 2022 and 2023. It's about $9.7 million in each year, because they prorated this deal multiple times. I think once with the extension and then again a later restructure. So yeah, he'll count almost $10 million against their 2023 cap space. But then you mentioned too, thinking that, especially now with this late breaking news that Brown may not miss the entire season, it seems a bit of a kind of, not a gamble, but maybe aggressive for Arizona. I get that they extended their GM and head coach this offseason, but, and I don't know this for a fact, but we've seen in the college football ranks where guys get extensions. In reality, it lowers buyouts and stuff like that. And those the details actually being changed. Maybe for all we know, Kingsbury and Kyed got extended, but in reality, maybe it made the out for Arizona a little bit more palatable. And I think their backs are to the fire here, and they think they need to win immediately. Otherwise, sweeping changes could be coming in Arizona.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And if you look at all of the, first head coach fired or next head coach fired, Cliff Kingsbury is usually near the top of the list there, because there have been some disappointing years there in Arizona. Another coach who came over from the college ranks, much like Matt Rule, has not worked out that well so far for the Cardinals. And unlike Matt Rule, who was a head coach in college, Cliff Kingsbury was about to be the offensive coordinator for USC after getting fired by Texas Tech before the Arizona Cardinals swept him up as their head coach. Partially it seemed like all the jokes were being made because he had met Sean McVay at one point or another. But it was kind of a strange hire at the time. And as I mentioned, has not worked out that great for them. Some other news of the day, Carson Wentz will be out for, I think it was 4 to 6 weeks for the Washington Commanders after fracturing a finger in that Thursday night game against the Chicago Bears. That means that Taylor Heineke is next up for the Washington Commanders. But I feel like, yeah, maybe you bridge with Taylor Heineke for maybe a week or two, but I feel like this is kind of a perfect opportunity for the Commanders to see what they have in Sam Howell both this season and moving forward here.
Yeah, especially because the Dallas Cowboys, without Dak Prescott, are second to last in their NFC East division at 4-2. You then have the 5-1 Giants and the 6-0 Eagles. So, as bad as the NFC is, it's tough sledding to make the playoffs for Washington. Again, though, maybe head coach Ron Rivera, another name potentially, on that hot seat, which is interesting. But I also think an interesting component here as well going forward is, look, the Philadelphia Eagles received a first-round pick from the Indianapolis Colts this past draft because Wentz played over 70 or 75% of offensive snaps for the team in 2021. Washington would give Indianapolis a second instead of a third round pick in next year's draft if he plays over 70% of snaps for them. So if the season is lost by the time he returns, which I think is fairly likely, whether it's Heineke or Sam Howell, it should be Sam Howell. You probably, you have to start making those tough decisions. I know it's kind of unfair or kind of a little bit of a shady move. You could argue that, but you know what? At the end of the day, it's a business. There are components like this in everything. And if you're Washington, it would just be kind of insane to not take that into consideration.
Yeah, because, even if Carson Wentz misses 4 games and he plays every snap after that, he'd still be right around like 75% of offensive snaps, right around there for the entire season. He'd have to miss, I think, around 5 or 6 games to get underneath that 70%. So at the very least, the Commanders probably should be looking to hold him out as long as possible with that finger recovery, maybe put him on injured reserve to ensure that it's at least 4 games. But yeah, I mean, they already know what they've got in Taylor Heineke. He can hold down the fort, but the NFC is weak this season, but it's not so weak that I envision the Washington Commanders being contenders when they've lost their quarterback for 4 to 6 weeks. Now they're going to have Taylor Heineke in there. As you mentioned, the NFC East is a lot stronger than a lot of people thought it would be, especially because of the New York Giants. And if you look at the New York Giants schedule as well, I think they've got like the 4th or 5th toughest schedule remaining. But they also have some very, very, very easily winnable games remaining on their schedule, including 2 against the Commanders, 1 against the Jaguars, 1 against the Detroit Lions. You've got the Seahawks in there. It's pretty easy for them to actually hit 9 or 10 wins this season. And it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Washington Commanders to do that. One other piece of news from today, Jack Easterby fired, or I guess they've mutually decided to part ways between the Houston Texans and Jack Easterby. It's interesting because Jack Easterby is not a name that's been mentioned a whole lot in the last year or two after he was, one of the biggest names in the NFL there for a while when the Deshaun Watson situation was really coming to a head. That's really originally one of the reasons why Deshaun Watson wanted out of Houston before everything that came about, with the sexual assault cases and everything, is that he didn't like the way this franchise was headed with Jack Easterby. Then Jack Easterby was really laying low over the last year or so, but now he's out in Houston at this point.
I think this is a big moment for this franchise and for ownership in Cal McNair, where it was kind of rumored that he, Easterby had his ear and could pull a lot of strings behind the scenes with Cal McNair. And look, they haven't done a lot of positive things. I do believe in the direction that Nick Caserio is going. I think they've made some prudent decisions and obviously have a bunch of extra draft capital and all those things going forward. But it had always kind of been rumored that he rubbed some players the wrong way and was too hands-on and too involved. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit about what you know from his time in New England, but I think this is a positive and an important step going forward. Put the power, again, needs to be delegated, but let Nick Caserio truly run the show. Maybe bring in a new president, try to have a new whole operations component and start fresh here now that you are kind of, rebuilding from scratch, but a couple of years into that process and trying to get back on track.
Yeah, I mean, I think things really kind of went sideways with Jack Easterby once he joined Houston, once he actually got power within that organization, because, sometimes it's hard to believe whether players really love a guy or if they're just going to say the positive things to the media about a guy. But I mean, basically everything in New England when Jack Easterby was here as the character coach or whatever his title was in New England was all positive, and players, or a lot of them, really did seem to like him. He's kind of a strange guy. I would say that, you can't always tell if at least I could never tell if it was all genuine coming from him, because he was like the most positive human being that you could possibly imagine. And I don't know how things went there in Houston, but obviously he was not, you know, liked by everyone within that organization. So I do think that this is probably going to be a net positive here for Houston. And it will allow Nick Caserio to really kind of run things the way that he wants to, with Lovie Smith there as head coach. And as you mentioned, I mean, they haven't started off the season overly positive, but it does feel like things are trending in the right direction for the Houston Texans. There is one comment in here, one other piece of news that we just didn't hit on. Buck Skullgang says Deshaun Watson visits the Ravens tomorrow. That is interesting. I'm not sure how much Deshaun Watson has left in the tank, but the Ravens certainly are a team that has needed wide receiver help for the past 8 months and done basically nothing to address it.
I think this is huge, actually. I made a joke during the game on Sunday when Robbie Anderson was, arguing with the wide receivers coach and whoever other coach he was arguing with, that he was on a stationary bike after that. And I said he's keeping his legs fresh for his debut with Baltimore next week. I think even if Deshaun Jackson doesn't actually produce a lot, this Ravens team needs a field stretcher. I think they need a guy that takes the top of opposing defenses. Rashad Bateman's not slow, but he's a good route runner. He's a good, player. He's not really, to me, like your explosive downfield threat on a snap-by-snap basis. Devin Duvernay, kind of the same thing. He has the speed, but I think he's more developed and more nuanced than that. So I like this, even if it's literally just being a decoy and just making defenses put guys back in coverage, which, of course, creates more room underneath for Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson's legs.
Yeah, they were kind of using Rashad Bateman as that deep threat, but I almost feel like that's kind of a waste of his skill set. I think he's more than that. And yeah, he's not a 4-2 guy. He's not a 4-3 guy. He's like a 4-4 guy, a really good route runner, can be strong at the point of attack. So yeah, I do think that getting that speedy guy in there who's maybe a little bit more developed than Devin Duvernay would certainly help them. Let's take a quick break here before we get up to one up, one down from this weekend. PFF Wire is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, let's talk about our one up, one down from the weekend. This is a good time to plug a piece I wrote for PFF.com. I gave one up, one down for all 32 NFL teams, or at least the ones who played this weekend. That will be a weekly feature. So make sure to get to PFF.com around noon every Monday to see the one up, one down. Brad, I'll let you start here. Who is your one up overall from this weekend's action?
Yeah, so it's going to be for me, rookie second rounder Arnold Ebiketie for the Atlanta Falcons. I wrote a piece a long time ago, not plugging it, but about the most important move that each team made in the offseason. And it wasn't necessarily what move is going to help them win the most games right away, but the Atlanta Falcons, outside of Grady Jarrett, had a non-existent pass rush coming into this season. They ranked dead last in both pressure rate and pass rush win rate last season at edge rusher by a comfortable margin. And so when they made this pick in the second round, I really liked it. The former Penn State guy, transfer from, I want to say, Temple before that, but a really athletic, toolsy guy, was not super productive, kind of like an Odafe Owe, but showed a lot of the intangibles that made you buy into what he could be at the next level with some development. He earned his first 80-plus grade for us this past week. They lost to Quan Graham, who's been playing very well for them in that game. It will determine how long he's out, but nevertheless, they needed another pass rusher to emerge, and I think this is a great sign for them. Looked really good against San Francisco, and hopefully can carry that forward for a legitimate Atlanta Falcons team that's in the mix in the NFC.
I know, it's pretty amazing. This weekend slate of games, I think there was just so many upsets. You basically really don't know what is going to happen in any game right now because I feel like we didn't have a great sense of which teams were going to be good or bad or somewhere in the middle heading into this season. My big one up is New York Jets cornerback Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner was one of my favorites in this whole pre-draft process. I thought, listen, if there's a cornerback who could potentially be drafted number one overall, I kind of liked Sauce Gardner. He didn't allow a single touchdown at Cincinnati. He was the tall cornerback, the fast cornerback, seemed like he could fit in any system. And he's been fantastic for the Jets so far. Earned a 80.0 PFF grade this weekend, 83.3 coverage grade. He only allowed one 8-yard catch on 6 targets with 3 forced incompletions. He also nearly had a pick six. The ball just, I think, hit the ground. It was kind of one that was kind of tipped up to him, but it hit the ground before it got tipped up to him. So that was one of the first few minutes of action in the NFL. Looked like Sauce Gardner already had a pick six, but that play got called back. Still wound up having a very, very strong performance in a upset win over, it was the Green Bay Packers, correct?
Amen.
So huge game for Sauce Gardner. Aaron Rodgers' struggles continue. And it would have been, 2 pick sixes by a rookie cornerback in 3 weeks for Aaron Rodgers too, because he had one with Jack Jones a few weeks ago as well. What is your one down from this weekend?
Yeah, so a game that probably should have been handled easily by the Minnesota Vikings, especially after the injury to Skylar Thompson, was not an easy win, and they kind of blew it in part because of Jalen Waddle. Obviously, a great player. Whenever we do these, we're not trashing the guy. He's only a stock down because his stock has been so astronomically high this season, but. The interception that Teddy Bridgewater threw was his fault. Hit him in the hands. He should have caught the ball over the middle. It was tipped up and then picked off. And he had a fumble that kind of out of nowhere. No one hit him. He just dropped the ball running across the middle late in that game. They actually won according to Kevin Cole's adjusted scores, which is a cool thing he does, just looking at the underlying metrics of production during a game. So they were close in this game. They threw for 9 yards per attempt, despite it being Skylar Thompson and Teddy Bridgewater in this game. They could have won this game if not for some blunders by Jalen Waddle.
My down is also from the Miami Dolphins, and that's left tackle Greg Little. Tough situation to be put in. He was playing for Teron Armstead, but he earned a 1.5 pass protection grade this weekend. Not great on 60 snaps, allowed 9 pressures, including 3 sacks, and was beaten by his defender another 10 times. So overall, in 60 overall snaps, 19, bad plays essentially by him. And Zadarius Smith was really getting after the quarterback in that game, Daniil Hunter. And actually, Skylar Thompson, I know he left early with a thumb injury, but he was one of our highest graded quarterbacks on the weekend. And Teddy Bridgewater actually wound up grading out pretty well too, despite some of the issues there on the offensive line. But things will get better eventually for the Miami Dolphins, but it's been a tough stretch for them ever since Tua Tagovailoa went out.
Even underrated too, Nick Needham, their outside cornerback, who's basically been playing in spot of Byron Jones, who Mike McDaniel actually said this past week is not progressing as well from Achilles recovery as they would hope. So who knows when he's even going to return? He was lost to an Achilles injury in his own right in this game. I mentioned in a trade piece today that William Jackson can maybe go to Miami. He wants to play more man coverage. No one plays more man coverage than the Miami Dolphins. So it has been tough sledding for him, but credit to Mike McDaniel. Like I said, 9 yards per attempt with 2 different quarterbacks, neither of which is your starter. With all the injuries along the offensive line, he has been phenomenal for that offense so far. If they can get and stay healthy, the sky could be the limit there.
Definitely. Any other of the trades from your piece that you wanted to plug? Because that was a great piece by you, some potential trade candidates before the NFL trade deadline.
Well, I appreciate it. Yes, there's only one other one in that one, and it was Cam Akers. We heard that he's probably played his last down for the Los Angeles Rams. Unfortunately, out of 89 running backs with the least 50 carries going back to the beginning of last season, he ranks 89th in rushing grade and 89th in yards per attempt. So whether you're looking at advanced stats or just yards per carry, dead last among all running backs with at least 50 carries. But nevertheless, had him getting traded for a low round pick. Now I'm blanking where I sent him, but there are a handful of teams that could use, just an early down, short yardage guy. Actually, I think it may have been Miami. Raheem Mostert has a knee injury he's dealing with. Chase Edmonds, their free agent acquisition, has not been as good as probably they hoped. And they can maybe use him on early downs, create all that separation with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and maybe just let him put his head down and fall forward for a couple yards in Miami.
It is one of those strange situations where, like, if you think around the league, what team could use a running back? You're like, the Rams could probably use a running back. It's like, okay, well, you can't trade him to the Rams because he's currently on the Rams. But yeah, it's the strange situation there with Cam Akers. Strange situation overall for the Rams. And I mean, after more injuries there on the offensive line, I know they won this weekend, but like, you have to wonder how far this Rams team can go with all of those issues on their offensive line. But they're definitely a team that could use a player. I mean, another player that I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a trade candidate. I know that he was mentioned before the season. I knew that they were going to be going into the season with him, but Isaiah Wynn for the Patriots, he's starting this season at right tackle for New England. It's not going well. The Patriots now for 3 straight weeks have replaced him, at least for spells, with Marcus Cannon. And I mean, if that at some point is going to become a permanent change for New England, which after 3 weeks of inserting Marcus Cannon in the game when Isaiah Wynn struggles, you kind of have to wonder at what point they are going to make that a permanent change in there. It would probably be best for both parties to move on there, for Isaiah Wynn to really just kind of raise his free agent value after the season as well, because I don't know, it's a tough situation for him. He was a good left tackle in the NFL, moves over to right tackle. He's really struggling, but that's a player that, I don't know. I mean, if the Los Angeles Rams wanted to make a trade for an offensive lineman, maybe at some point Isaiah Wynn becomes available there.
It's a great point. I think that, the sticking point there is he's playing on that 5th-year option. So, these trades often come down to contracts, and I think New England would have to eat some money there, though maybe they would. I mean, maybe they would say, look, it's a sunk cost already. Either we pay him the entire thing or we eat, 80% of it, but we get a draft pick back in return. Probably like we talked about, because there's so many tackle injuries, probably could get an early day 3 pick potentially, for his services. So, one to monitor, no question. A lot of teams need tackle help across the league.
Yeah, and I mean, but that almost becomes like a snake eating its own tail situation too, because then the Patriots would need offensive line help, and they've already traded away Justin Herron. So at that point, I know you don't necessarily want to pay a backup $11 million, but it might be worth keeping him on there as a backup anyway. Let's talk a little bit about Monday night's matchup between the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers. This week's best bets segment. We've got the Chargers favored by 4.5 points. The total is 45.5. Any bet that you like in this one between the Chargers and the Broncos?
Yeah, so I don't love either side or the total. I would say, though, as crazy as it may seem, I would lean towards the Broncos covering the 4.5 points. It's basically do or die for them, frankly, for their entire season. It's a huge AFC West matchup. They've already lost to the Las Vegas Raiders, their only win on the season for Las Vegas. They have a bunch of injuries, obviously, but get that mini bye coming off a Thursday all the way to a Monday Night Football. Yeah. And I think without Keenan Allen for the Chargers, and with them starting Jamari Salyer, the 6th-round tackle, who has been excellent so far this season, but you get Bradley Chubb, you get Baron Brown, and you get a really good defense for Denver, might be a challenge. The one bet I think I am going to play is Jerry Jeudy under 3.5 receptions. Our PFF Greenline props loves it. Ben Brown, our lead betting analyst, has talked about he's been making a killing on under receptions props because offenses just stink this season. And Jeudy just kind of had some focus drops, kind of been disengaged on some reps. I think he could have an impact where he breaks a couple big ones, but 4 receptions for him is far from a guarantee.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking at PFF Greenline right now, and it does look like it's actually down to the Chargers favored by 4 points in this game. PFF Greenline likes the Broncos at +4 with a 2.5% edge. They also like the Broncos money line +174 with a 3.3% edge, and they like the over with a 0.4% edge. Kind of feeling that over. This is just going off vibes here, but I kind of feel like this is the week that Russell Wilson bounces back a little bit. I think that everyone's been so low on Russell Wilson that, I mean, J.C. Jackson's really struggled for the Chargers at cornerback so far this season. Some of those offseason improvements that they made haven't totally panned out. And I feel like with the ebbs and flows of the NFL season, this was kind of a down week for Geno Smith. Everyone's been talking about how much better Geno Smith has been than Russell Wilson. I could just kind of see that going the other way on this one. I do think that the Broncos defense has been legit. And I think that that's going to be a pretty tough challenge for Justin Herbert and the Chargers offense, especially without Keenan Allen in there. They just have not been the same team so far this season without Allen.
Yeah, no question about it. And then also, with Khalil Mack, you obviously still have one very, very good player to deal with. If they had both Mack and Bosa, I would say good luck to you. But I think they can do enough on the offensive line to kind of, keep Russell Wilson on his feet and move things around, move the pocket a little bit, do some of the more creative things to kind of negate that pass rush from Khalil Mack. So, yeah, look, it could look dumb. I'm definitely not betting the Denver Broncos. But like I said, I don't think people should be super confident the Chargers are 4.5 points better than them right now, especially also a point. LA teams don't have home games. I mean, this is going to be a Broncos home game in LA. I wouldn't be surprised if they do if Justin Herbert's doing a silent count in this game.
No, I mean, absolutely, especially with Denver being as close as it is and the fan base that the Denver Broncos have. No, it's a great point. I mean, the Chargers are a great team. They've got a small group of a very of a strong fan base, but it's not enough to necessarily fill a stadium at this point, especially when you know fans from other teams have enough money to travel there, and it doesn't help that people want to go to Southern California too. It's not like it's not like you're going to, no offense to Cleveland, but like Cleveland or like Green Bay or anything like that. It's a destination for these fan bases. So yeah, that certainly doesn't help as well. Lots of teams from other fans already living out in Los Angeles too. Before we head out for Monday's show, we'll be back on Wednesday. Anything else from this weekend's slate of games that you wanted to touch on?
Ooh, that's a good point. I'll just, I guess, throw a bet in. I think the Atlanta Falcons looks they're catching 6.5 or 6 points against Cincinnati. Cincinnati, they did kind of win at the end of the game. They won at the end of the game. They covered against the New Orleans Saints, but a relatively uninspiring win for them. They just continue to be very predictable. And I just think this Atlanta Falcons team is too good to be getting that many points against a mediocre right now Cincinnati Bengals team.
I'm just fascinated, and it's because I live in the area. It's because I covered them for 8 years, whatever it is. Just the situation in New England right now with Bailey Zappi now 2-0 as a starter. The Patriots have essentially turned around their season with Bailey Zappi as their quarterback, and it's only a matter of time before Mac Jones is ready to come back off of that high ankle sprain. And Bill Belichick, as of this morning, still was not committing to Mac Jones being the starting quarterback in New England once he is fully healthy. And I mean, I was asking some people around the league today about it, and they still aren't totally sure about Bailey Zappi being, a future starter in the NFL. He's looking like it right now, but this is a good chance for me to plug a piece that's coming out tomorrow. I do my weekly buy or sell. I ask people around the NFL if they're buying or selling certain storylines, and maybe kind of dig into how the Patriots have handled their offense with Mac Jones at quarterback versus how they've handled it with Bailey Zappi at quarterback. Their play action rate has gone up by like 20% with Bailey Zappi at quarterback. Mac Jones had, I think, the second highest average depth of target in the NFL. Bailey Zappi's is like the second lowest in the NFL. They've basically completely changed their offense to make it as easy as possible for Bailey Zappi. And I think that that's part of the reason why they're winning is that they have simplified things. They have made things easier for him. I think that if they found like a middle ground for Mac Jones where he wasn't trying to throw 20 yards downfield on every play, or if he wasn't, if they threw in a little bit of play action for him, a little bit of RPOs for him, he'd probably be performing about as well as Bailey Zappi is right now. And I think for the Patriots, after investing a 15th overall pick in Mac Jones last year, they at least have to give him that shot when he is healthy. I know that you want to ride the hot hand with Bailey Zappi, but he's not going anywhere for the next 4 years. So they can go back to Mac Jones, see if he falters, then turn back to Bailey Zappi. I know it would be hard to go back to Mac Jones then at that point, but I don't know, just a fascinating situation for me.
It is super fascinating. And this game is interesting too. I mean, the Bears are dead last in our pass rush win rate by almost 10%. It's probably a good game for either guy. We mentioned Jones, definitely more aggressive. He's second in big time throw rate when kept clean without pressure. But then Bailey Zappi is our highest graded quarterback, tied with Josh Allen when not pressure. Like you said, more taking what the defense gives him. But also to put a bow on the show with the Carolina Panthers start and the Patriots finish, the Panthers traded up for Matt Corral with the Patriots. The Patriots traded down. The pick they got to trade down was Bailey Zappi, and they got a future third-round pick, which right now is pick 64 in the 2023 NFL draft because Miami forfeited their first-round pick. Wow. So looking pretty good for New England in that trade right now.
Yeah, and it was funny. One of the things that someone said to me was that he thought that the Patriots would trick a team into sending a draft pick for Bailey Zappi. I certainly don't think that's going to be anytime soon because the Patriots might as well, keep Bailey Zappi as a cheap, experienced, solid backup for as long as they can. But, I mean, they traded Jacoby Brissett after his rookie season. They traded Jimmy Garoppolo midway through his fourth season. They traded Jarrett Stidham this offseason. They have a history of trading young quarterbacks on rookie deals. And I guess we'll just have to find out whether that player that the Patriots trade is Bailey Zappi or Mac Jones, depending on who they eventually settle on as a starting quarterback. But that will do it for today's PFF Wire. We will be back with you guys again on Wednesday. If you prefer to listen to us rather than watching us, then subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple or Spotify. Make sure to download the PFF app. Make sure to keep it on pff.com for all of your news and analysis. Subscribe to PFF Plus, only $79.99 a year. You can still get a free weekly trial of PFF as well. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed, and make sure to read Brad's pieces on trade candidates, how to fix the Carolina Panthers. Make sure to read my pieces on one up, one down for all 32 NFL teams, plus tomorrow's buy or sell that focuses pretty heavily on the New York Giants, Bailey Zappi, and Justin Fields. So we will be talking to you guys again on Wednesday. We do our shows Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.